The village of Obalu lay nestled at the edge of the great Ngoma forest, its huts arranged in a half-circle, as if bowing in reverence to the towering trees. Life in Obalu pulsed with the rhythm of drums, the chatter of market women, and the stories, passed from elder to child under the glow of the evening fire. Here, every soul knew their place, for the land thrived on tradition and harmony. But whispers floated on the warm breeze. The elders spoke of strange metal beasts glimpsed on distant roads, and young men whispered of far-off cities where stories were not told, but captured in moving images. Though the drumbeats still echoed across the plains, an unsettling murmur of change began to creep into Obalu, disturbing the balance it had known for generations. Beyond the village, the Ngoma forest loomed, its canopy thick and impenetrable, shielding secrets as ancient as the earth. The forest was both a source of life and a keeper of mysteries. Its streams fed the crops, its trees provided shade, and its fruits filled the bellies of the villagers. But the elders warned of its darker side. The forest watchers, they said in low, trembling tones, spirits dwelled among its roots. Their whispers carried on the rustling leaves. It was forbidden to enter beyond the first row of trees after sunset. Legends told of wanderers who strayed too far, only to vanish, their names lost to the wind. For Nyasha, the forest was more than a backdrop to her life. It held the key to her deepest secret, a truth that even she feared to fully understand. Nyasha walked through the market, her gloved hands clutching a woven basket. Her beauty was undeniable, skin smooth as river stones, eyes that caught the light like dew on morning grass. Yet it was not her beauty that turned heads, but the gloves she never removed. Even in the sweltering heat of the sun, the children of Obalu whispered behind her back. "Why does she wear them?" one would ask. "Perhaps her hands are cursed," another would reply, their eyes wide with imagined horror. Among the women, the gossip was harsher. "She hides something," they muttered as they pounded yams. No one is that perfect unless they are concealing a flaw. But Nyasha remained silent, her head held high as if she could not hear their words. Inside, her heart ached. She longed to explain, to shout her truth to the skies. But she knew the villagers would never understand. The gloves were not a choice. They were her destiny, and destiny was not a burden she could cast aside. At the edge of the fields, Muziki struck the earth with his hoe, the sweat on his brow stinging his eyes. He worked harder than any man in the village. Yet the elders spoke only of Nyasha. "Such wisdom in one so young," they said. "She will be a great leader someday." Muziki seethed. Where was his praise? Had he not toiled in the fields to provide for his family? Did the elders not see the calluses on his hands? His sister's gloved hands had never known such labor. Yet she was the one who walked with grace, who turned heads, who earned their respect. As the sun dipped low, Muziki leaned on his hoe and stared at the Ngoma forest. If only they knew the truth about her, he muttered. The seed of bitterness had taken root in his heart, and it began to grow. In the heart of Obalu, Mama Zira sat beneath the ancient baobab tree, her staff resting across her knees. The children gathered at her feet, their eyes wide with wonder, as she wove tales of gods and spirits, of courage and sacrifice. To the villagers, she was more than an elder. She was the keeper of their history, the guardian of their truth. But Mama Zira carried more than stories. She carried secrets. Her eyes, clouded with age, had seen the truth behind Nyasha's gloves. She had seen the spirit's mark, glowing faintly beneath the fabric. And though she pitied Nyasha's burden, she knew it could not be shared. "You must be strong, child," she had told Nyasha one evening as they sat by the fire. "The balance of the forest depends on you." and the truth. The truth must remain hidden. The whispers grew louder with each passing day. Why won't she? Tell us, the villagers asked. What is she hiding? Even the elders, who had once defended Nyasha, began to look at her with questioning eyes. The final straw came during the harvest festival. As the drums beat and the dancers spun, a group of women approached Nyasha. "Show us your hands," they demanded. "If there is no curse, you have nothing to fear." Nyasha froze. The crowd gathered around her, their faces a mix of curiosity and suspicion. "I cannot," she said. Her voice trembling, she turned and fled, her tears falling, unseen. As Nyasha retreated to the safety of her hut, Muziki stood among the crowd, his heart pounding with anger and triumph. The villagers' doubts mirrored his own, and he knew he could use them to his advantage. "She's hiding something dangerous," he told the men as they gathered by the fire. "What if she's cursed, like our mother was accused of being? What if her gloves bring ruin to us all?" The men nodded, their faces grim. Muziki's words fanned the flames of mistrust, and the rift between Nyasha and the village grew wider. That night, Mama Zira found Nyasha sitting by the edge of the forest, her gloved hands clasped tightly in her lap. The elder's voice was soft but firm. "Do not let their ignorance shake you, child. The truth is heavier than they can bear." Nyasha looked up, her eyes filled with tears. "But how long must I carry it alone, Mama Zira? The weight? It crushes me." Mama Zira placed a hand on Nyasha's shoulder. "Until the time is right. If the truth is revealed too soon, it will bring chaos, not peace. Trust in the forest, and trust in yourself." As the wind rustled through the trees, Nyasha nodded. She would endure. For now, the air in Obalu grew heavy as Muziki leaned against the hoe in his hand, watching the setting sun cast its golden glow over the fields. His gaze shifted to the village square, where the elders sat in a semicircle, their voices raised, in laughter and storytelling. Among them sat Nyasha, her hands gloved as always, her head tilted slightly, as she listened with an expression of quiet grace. Muziki's jaw tightened. He thought of his aching muscles, the sweat that soaked his tunic, and the long days spent in the fields, while Nyasha sat at the elder's feet, earning praise for her wisdom. It was unbearable. "She has them all fooled," Muziki muttered, gripping the hoe so tightly his knuckles turned white. If they knew what those gloves were hiding, they wouldn't worship her like some untouchable spirit. He turned back to the rows of corn, but the bitterness in his heart grew roots. It whispered to him in the wind, feeding his resentment until he could no longer hear the wisdom of his own conscience. In the days that followed, Muziki's whispers began to spread. "Have you ever wondered," he said to the women at the well, "why Nyasha wears gloves even in the heat of the sun?" The women paused, glancing at each other. "We've wondered, yes," one said hesitantly. Muziki leaned in, lowering his voice. "My mother once told me something before she passed. She said there was darkness in our bloodline, a curse born from forbidden rituals. Perhaps Nyasha is hiding the mark of that curse beneath those gloves." The women gasped, drawing their shawls closer. It was not long before the whispers grew legs, running through the village like a shadow. The elders began to watch Nyasha with narrowed eyes, their once warm greetings replaced with cautious nods. Nyasha felt the shift, and her heart ached. She could hear the murmurs behind her back when she walked through the market, see the accusing glances cast her way, but she said nothing, keeping her head high, even as the weight of their suspicion pressed down on her. The Festival of Unity was meant to bring the village together, a celebration of life and harvest. But as the drums beat and the dancers twirled, the air was thick with tension. Nyasha stood at the edge of the crowd, Her gloved hands clasped tightly before her. She could feel their eyes on her, hear the whispers that rose and fell like waves. It was Muziki who stepped forward first, his voice cutting through the rhythm of the drums. "Nyasha," he called, drawing the attention of the crowd. "We have celebrated together, worked together, and shared our lives. But how can we truly trust someone who hides their hands from us?" The crowd murmured, the tension mounting as Muziki continued. "If there is no curse, no darkness, then prove it. Remove your gloves and show us the truth." Nyasha froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She looked around at the faces of her people, some curious, others frightened, many angry. "I cannot," she said, her voice trembling but steady. "Why not?" Muziki pressed. "What are you hiding?" Tears stung Nyasha's eyes as she shook her head. "Please," she whispered, "you do not understand. Some truths are too heavy for this world." But the crowd was relentless, their voices rising in a storm of demands. Overwhelmed, Nyasha turned and fled, her tears falling as she disappeared into the darkness of the Ngoma forest. By the time Mama Zira found her, Nyasha was sitting by a stream, her knees drawn to her chest and her gloved hands resting on the earth. "They hate me," Nyasha whispered as Mama Zira approached. "They think I am cursed." Mama Zira lowered herself onto a rock, her staff resting against her knees. "The weight of their ignorance is heavy, child," she said, her voice calm and steady. "But it is not heavier than the truth you carry." Nyasha looked up, her face streaked with tears. "Why me, Mama Zira? Why must I bear this alone?" "Because you are the chosen one," Mama Zira said simply. She reached out, placing a hand on Nyasha's shoulder. "The gloves are both a blessing and a burden, but they are yours to carry. The forest chose you, just as it chose those who came before you." Nyasha nodded slowly, though the pain in her chest did not ease. Will they ever understand? Mama Zira's eyes clouded with sorrow. Perhaps, but not today. That night, as the moon rose high above the Ngoma forest, Mama Zira sat with Nyasha by the fire. The elder's voice was low and rhythmic, weaving a story that felt as ancient as the earth itself. "Long ago," she began, "the forest was not as you see it now. It was wild and untamed, its spirits restless and angry. The people of Abalu lived in fear, for the spirits demanded offerings, blood and fire to keep their wrath at bay. But one day a great spirit descended from the sky, its form a blend of wind and flame. It spoke to the people and said, 'I will bring peace to the forest, but you must choose a guardian, one who will carry my blessing and my burden. This guardian will wear my mark, and through them, the balance of the forest will be maintained.' The people chose a family, and the spirit wove gloves from the sacred fibers of the forest. These gloves, the spirit said, will contain my power, but beware. If they are removed, the balance will be broken, and the forest will rise against you." And so, the guardians were born. Your mother carried this burden before you, as did her mother before her. And now, it is yours to bear. Nyasha stared into the flames, her heart heavy with the weight of the story. "The gloves," she murmured, "are not mine. They belong to the forest." "Yes," Mama Zira said, her voice gentle, "and you must protect them, no matter the cost." In the shadows of the village, Muziki stood at the edge of his hut, watching the flickering light of Mama Zira's fire. The bitterness in his heart burned brighter than ever, but it was no longer alone. Beside it sat a darker desire, a yearning for proof, for glory, for power. He turned away from the light and strode into the night, his footsteps carrying him toward a group of men waiting by the edge of the forest. Their clothes were strange, their voices loud and eager. They were outsiders, treasure hunters, who had come seeking the fabled heart of the forest. "I can take you to it," Muziki said, his voice low. "But you must promise me something in return." The men exchanged glances, their eyes gleaming with greed. "And what would that be?" Muziki's lips curved into a bitter smile. "I want you to prove that my sister is a fraud." As the night deepened, Muziki crept into Mama Zira's hut. The map hung on the wall, its edges worn and its surface marked with ancient symbols. Muziki's fingers trembled as he reached for it, but his resolve did not falter. The moment his hand touched the map, a sudden gust of wind blew through the hut, extinguishing the fire. Muziki froze, his heart pounding, but he did not stop. He pulled the map from the wall and slipped into the night. Far away, deep within the Ngoma forest, the earth began to stir. The air grew heavy, the trees shuddered, and the ancestral spirit awoke. Its voice rumbled through the darkness, low and furious. "The seal has been broken!" The crowd gathered. At the edge of the Ngoma forest, the air heavy with suspicion and unease. Muziki stood tall, his chest heaving as he dragged Nyasha forward by the wrist. The treasure hunters, their strange clothes and sharp eyes, loomed behind him, watching the scene unfold with greedy anticipation. "Tell them," Muziki's voice cut through the murmuring crowd. "Tell them what you're hiding." Nyasha stumbled, but steadied herself, her gloved hands trembling at her sides. She looked at the faces before her, familiar faces twisted by doubt and fear. The people she loved, the people she had protected, now looked at her as though she were a stranger. "I have nothing to hide," she said softly, her voice trembling like a leaf in the wind. "Lies," Muzika roared, pointing an accusing finger. "If that's true, then prove it. Take off the gloves." The villagers murmured, their whispers rising like smoke. Some watched with pity, others with anger. The elders stood silent, their eyes heavy, with questions they dared not ask. Nyasha's chest tightened as she stepped forward, her gaze meeting Muziki's. "You do not understand what you are asking," she said, her voice steady, despite the storm in her heart. "If I remove these gloves, the balance will be broken. The consequences will be grave, for all of us." "Enough," Muziki shouted. "You speak of balance and consequences, but all I see is deceit. Show us the truth, or admit your lies." Tears welled in Nyasha's eyes as she looked to Mama Zira, who stood silently at the edge of the crowd. The elder nodded once, her face grave. "Do what must be done, child," she said softly. With trembling hands, Nyasha reached for the edges of her gloves. As the fabric slipped from her fingers, a gasp rippled through the crowd. Nyasha's hands, now bare, glowed with an otherworldly light. Lines of pulsating markings, like veins of fire, etched their way across her skin. The light shimmered, casting an eerie glow that painted the faces of the stunned villagers. She is marked," someone whispered. The ground beneath them trembled, a deep rumble rising from the earth. The trees of the Ngoma forest shuddered as though awakening from a long slumber. The light from Nyasha's hands grew brighter, reaching toward the sky like tendrils of flame. "What is this?" Muziki stammered, stepping back. His bravado faltered. As the ground cracked beneath his feet, a low hum filled the air, rising into a deafening roar. The villagers screamed as the forest erupted into chaos. Trees bent and twisted, their roots tearing through the soil. The river overflowed its banks, rushing toward the village with terrifying speed. The air grew thick with the scent of earth and fire, and then, from the depths of the forest it appeared. The ancestral spirit towered above them, its form a swirling blend of fire, vines, and wind. Its eyes glowed like molten gold. Its voice, a rumble that shook the heavens. Who dares disturb the balance? It thundered, its gaze sweeping over the trembling crowd. The villagers fell to their knees, their faces pale with fear. Muziki stood, frozen, his lips trembling, as the spirit's gaze fell upon him. "It was not me," he whispered, his voice barely audible. The spirit's eyes narrowed. "Lies," it said, its voice like the crack of thunder. "Your greed and betrayal have awakened me. You sought to destroy what I have entrusted to this land." The spirit's gaze turned to Nyasha, who stood with her glowing hands clasped before her. "And you," it said, its voice softer, but no less powerful. "You have carried the burden of my blessing. Yet now, the balance teeters on the edge of destruction. What will you do to restore it?" Nyasha swallowed hard, her heart heavy with grief and resolve. She stepped forward, her glowing hands reaching toward the spirit in supplication. "I will do whatever it takes," she said, her voice strong despite the tears streaming down her face. "If my life is the price of balance, then I offer it freely. Let the forest have me, but spare the village." The spirit tilted its head, its fiery form flickering. "Your sacrifice is noble," it said, "but the betrayal runs deeper than you alone can mend." Muziki's heart pounded as he watched his sister kneel before the spirit, guilt twisted in his chest, each beat echoing the weight of his actions. The treasure hunters behind him edged back, their greed replaced with terror. "No," Muziki said suddenly, stepping forward. "No, this is not her burden to bear. It is mine." The villagers gasped as Muziki stood between Nyasha and the spirit, his hands raised in surrender. "I betrayed her. I betrayed all of you," he said, his voice breaking. "I let jealousy blind me, and I led these men here out of greed. I have destroyed our trust and broken the balance. If someone must pay, let it be me." The spirit regarded Muziki with piercing eyes. "You seek redemption?" it asked. "I seek to make things right," Muziki replied, his voice steady, despite the fear in his heart. The spirit was silent for a long moment, its fiery form flickering. Then it reached out, a tendril of fire wrapping around Muziki's hand. Pain shot through him as a mark appeared on his skin, a scar, dark and jagged, etched into his flesh. "This will remain as a reminder of your betrayal," the spirit said, "but your courage has spared you and your village from destruction. Go forth and honor the balance you have broken." The chaos began to subside. The river receded, the trees stilled, and the earth grew quiet once more. The villagers rose slowly, their faces etched with awe and humility. Nyasha stood, her glowing hands clasped before her. The spirit turned to her one last time. "You will remain the guardian of the heart," it said. "Its secrets and its power are yours to protect. The gloves will bind you to this duty, as they have bound those before you." Nyasha nodded, her heart heavy but resolute. "I will honor this duty," she said softly. The spirit vanished, its form dissolving into the forest like smoke. The villagers stood in silence, their gazes turning to Nyasha. One by one, they knelt before her, their heads bowed in reverence and apology. Muziki stepped forward, his scarred hand trembling. "Nyasha," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I am sorry, I failed you." Nyasha reached out, placing her glowing hands over his. "You are my brother," she said gently. "We must carry this together now." The village was spared, but the lesson remained. Greed blinds the heart, but love and sacrifice can restore what is lost. The ground grew still, and the howling winds faded into an uneasy silence. The ancestral spirit, its towering form flickering like fire in the night, surveyed the villagers with glowing eyes. Its voice, deep and resonant, carried a weight that settled heavily in the hearts of everyone present. You have been spared, it declared, its tone calmer now, but no less commanding. But do not mistake mercy for approval. The balance that binds this land, this forest, and your lives has been disturbed. Your greed and disregard for sacred traditions have brought this upon you. The villagers knelt, their heads bowed, their breaths shallow with fear. The elders, who had once spoken of honor and wisdom, looked away, ashamed. Children clung to their mothers, their wide eyes fixed on the spirit's shifting form. Listen well, the spirit continued, its voice rolling like distant thunder. Progress may come, but it must not trample upon the roots of your ancestors. If you forget the ways of the forest, the balance will break again, and next time, there will be no mercy. Its gaze shifted to Nyasha, who stood trembling but unyielding. And you, it said, softer now, though no less powerful. You are the guardian. The heart of the forest rests in your care, as it has with those before you. The gloves bind you to this sacred duty. You must protect what others seek to destroy. Nyasha stepped forward, her gloved hands glowing faintly in the dim light. Her voice, though quiet, carried the strength of her resolve. I will honor this duty, spirit of the forest. I will protect the heart, even if it means bearing this burden alone. The spirit's flames dimmed slightly, as though satisfied by her answer. Then go, guardian, it said. Guard it well. The spirit turned its gaze to Muziki, who knelt trembling before it, his head lowered in shame. And you, it said, its tone sharpened with disappointment. Your betrayal has scarred not only the land, but your people and your own heart. For this, you will bear a mark. A tendril of flame reached out and touched Muziki's hand. He cried out, clutching it as the fire etched a jagged scar into his skin. The pain was brief, but searing. A reminder he would carry for the rest of his life. This mark will remind you of the greed that blinded you, the spirit said, but it will also remind you of the courage you found to stand for what is right. You have been forgiven, but only because your sister has shown a love greater than your betrayal. Muziki looked up, tears streaming down his face. He turned to Nyasha, his voice breaking as he spoke. I am sorry, sister. I let jealousy poison my heart. I failed you. Nyasha knelt beside him, placing her glowing hands over his scarred one. You are my brother, she said softly. We carry this together now. Let the past be a lesson, not a weight. Muziki nodded, his heart heavy with regret, but lighter with hope. I will do better, he promised. I will help the village honor what we nearly lost. As dawn broke over the village, the elders called the people together. The night's events had left them shaken, but determined. Standing in the light of the rising sun, they addressed the crowd. We were wrong, Elder Bako said, his voice trembling with emotion. We let our fears and greed cloud our judgment. We forgot the wisdom of our ancestors and nearly destroyed ourselves in the process. Another elder, Naya, stepped forward. From this day, let us vow to honor the ancient ways. The forest is not ours to take, it is ours to protect. Let us live in harmony with its spirits, as our forebears taught us. The villagers murmured their agreement, heads nodding, as resolve grew among them. Young and old alike joined hands, their differences set aside in the face of what they had endured. This land will thrive again, Elder Bako declared. But only if we remember the lessons of this night. That evening, as the village gathered around the fire, Mama Zara began to speak. Her voice, rich and full of age-old wisdom, carried through the quiet air. Long ago, she began, the ancestors spoke of a time when greed would blind the hearts of men and women alike. They warned us that forgetting the sacred would bring ruin. Yet even in ruin, there is hope. For love and sacrifice have the power to restore what is lost. She looked around, her gaze settling on each face, young and old. We have seen this truth with our own eyes. Let it not be forgotten. Teach it to your children, and they will teach it to theirs. For it is only in remembering that we can keep the balance. The fire crackled as the villagers listened, their hearts heavy with the weight of her words, but filled with determination to do better. Greed blinds us to the sacred, Mama Zira said, her voice soft but firm. But love and sacrifice can restore what is lost. Later that night, Nyasha stood at the edge of the Ngoma forest, her glowing gloves casting a faint light in the darkness. The trees swayed gently in the night breeze, their leaves whispering secrets only she could hear. She gazed into the depths of the forest, her heart heavy yet resolute. The burden was hers to carry, but she did not carry it alone. The spirit's warning echoed in her mind, but so did the hope of her people's newfound promise. As the moonlight bathed the forest in silver, Nyasha stepped forward, her glowing hands reaching out as though to touch the very heart of the land she had vowed to protect. The forest, alive and eternal, whispered back, and so, under the watchful eye of the moon, the guardian remained.